The breeze gently caresses your face as you await the words of wisdom and consciousness of Madam C.J. Walker, America's first self-made millionaire. Hello, ladies. Welcome to my humble abode. Please make yourselves at home. I first want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here and share your inspiring stories. So please allow me this opportunity to share my story with you. You may know me as Madam C.J. Walker, but I was born Sarah Breedlove on December 23rd, 1867, in a cabin on a cotton plantation owned by Robert W. Burney in Delta, Louisiana, just 2 years after the end of the Civil War. I am the only person in my family of 8 who was not born in bondage. At the age of 7, yellow fever struck the plantation where we lived. My parents did not survive that epidemic. My brother Alex moved to Vicksburg, Mississippi, and then from there he went west to Denver, Colorado. My other brothers moved to St. Louis, Missouri. Well, my sister Lavinia and I grew tired of working in the cotton fields, so we decided to move to Vicksburg too. While there, Lavinia met and married a man named Jesse Powell. Oh, y'all, he was the meanest man I have ever met in my life. I lived with him for a while, but see, Jesse was so cruel that he made life unbearable. At the age of 14, I married Moses Jeff McWilliams. You know, Jeff was a hard-working man, but I must admit, I married him to get a home of my own. 3 years later, we had a baby daughter. We named her Lelia. Jeff worked where he could, and I worked as a laundrywoman, and I took care of Lelia. Now, if I've ever accomplished anything in my life, it is because I've been willing to work hard. We survived for 2 more years until Jeff's death during a race riot in Greenwood, Mississippi. I wanted to keep my daughter safe, so I decided to move to St. Louis, Missouri, too. The prospect of Lelia and I starting a new beginning was absolutely exciting. While there, I met a woman named Annie Turnbow Malone. Now, Annie was a Negro businesswoman. She was an educator, an inventor, and a philanthropist. She had started her hair care business in the early 1900s called the Poro Company. I worked for her for a while as an agent selling Poro products door to door. I have to tell you this, my time in St. Louis was enlightening. In 1906, I attended the World's Fair, which was being held in St. Louis, and I was so impressed with the Negro leaders who were in attendance. In attendance were such luminaries as Paul Laurence Dunbar. You know, he was one of the first Negro poets to achieve national recognition. He wrote in conventional English and in Negro dialect. And he lived in Denver in 1899. And while there, he wrote 3 poems that were published in the Denver Post. They were Yearning, Morning in Denver, and Menace. The man was such a prolific writer, I must share some of his words with you. Golden glow of the morning over the snow-capped heights, not a cloud between, and the wondrous scene sets all my griefs to rights. For rage seems poor and petty in sight of the sun-kissed peaks, and I have no care for the pain we bear, nor the tears that dew our cheeks. Life seems broader and deeper for the breadth and height I see. Though I love the main, yet the rolling plain and the snow-capped hills for me. So here I sit, all a wonder, by the morning silence held, and gazing high at the hills and sky, clasped hands with gods upheld. Now, just a portion of Lias Lias written in Negro dialect. Lias Lias, bless the law. Don't you know the day's abroad? If you don't get up, you scamp, there'll be trouble in this camp. Thanks, I'm gonna let you sleep while I make sure board and keep. Well, that's a pretty how to do. Don't you hear me, Lias, you? Bet if I come across this floor, you won't find no time to snow. Daylight all shining in while you still sleep, why it's a sin. Ain't the candle light enough to burn out without a stuff? But you go the whole day through, burning up the daylight too. You should take a gander of that poem. It's a long one, but it's a very delightful poem. Now, also in attendance was W.E.B. Du Bois, scholar, author, and political activist. The man is a very intelligent man. Booker T. Washington was there. You know, I discovered later that he was the founder of the National Negro Business League, an organization for Negro businessmen. Margaret Murray Washington, Booker T. Washington's wife, herself a lecturer, teacher, and journalist, was in St. Louis too. Also taking part in the festivities were 200 delegates of the National Association of Colored Women, an organization that Margaret was a leader of and still is a leader of. She spoke to its St. Louis branch, and her speech was so spellbinding that, you know, the St. Louis press ran her picture and reported on her speech, making it the first time that anyone in the St. Louis press had really did any kind of positive coverage on any Negro woman. She was immaculately dressed. She was articulate, and she was composed, and I was inspired. So at the age of 37, I left St. Louis and moved to Denver, Colorado, where my brother Alex had lived and died. I joined his wife and my 4 nieces there. Now, meanwhile, for many years, I had developed a scalp ailment that made me lose most of my hair. So I experimented with home remedies and products that I bought from the store, including those made by my mentor, Annie Malone. I was my first subject, and I had great success. Now, I found work in Denver cooking for a pharmacist named E.L. Schultz. He owned a chain of drugstores, and you know what? He is a very prominent figure in the Denver community. My conversations with him proved to be very enlightening. He gave me inside information on the biology of hair care and scalp treatment, and he shared that information freely. Now, I must say, living in Denver was very refreshing. Though there were elements of segregation and racism, life was much more freeing there. Did you know that women obtained the right to vote in 1893 in Colorado? The rest of us, we're still waiting for that privilege, aren't we? Yes. Now, I never started anything doubtingly, and I've always believed in keeping at things with a vim burst of energy. So I decided to go into business for myself while in Denver. I started to make my own hair care products, which were ordered through the mail. Business was booming. And I wrote of my success to Charles Joseph Walker. Charles Joseph Walker. He was a very close friend and an advisor. You know, he gave me advice on advertising and promotion. You know, he made his way to Denver, and on January 4th, 1906, we were married. From then on, I called myself Madam C.J. Walker. I think it sounds elegant. Now, when C.J. settled in, he helped me run the business. And we were a team for a while. I was convinced that my hair care preparations would fill a long felt want. And when we found it impossible to agree due to his narrowness of vision, I embarked in business for myself. So on September 1906, I left on a sales trip, traveling to 9 states by train. I went to Pittsburgh, and while in Pittsburgh, I recognized the business potential there. See, Pittsburgh was much closer to large, major cities which had large Negro populations, like New York, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. So, in 1908, Lelia and I moved to Pittsburgh. We opened a beauty parlor, and we established Lelia College, a school for training agents whom I call hair culturists. Now, the orders were coming in so quickly that I couldn't keep up. So I sent for my daughter, Lelia. She had just graduated from college, and I brought her to Denver so she could handle the business that I was generating. See, what I would do is I would travel taking orders, and then I would send the orders back to Denver, where Lelia and her 4 cousins actually mailed the orders out and the products to the customers. Now, in 1911, September, the business was really booming. So the necessary papers were drawn up to establish the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company in Indianapolis. Ah, what a joyous day that was. I was the sole stockholder. Now, did you know that the Walker Building was the first owned and Negro-owned and operated business of its kind in America? I trained women to be hair culturists or agents, and I employed thousands and thousands of women, not only in America, but in Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, Costa Rica, and the Panama Canal. And I paid them a good wage. Now, with the growing popularity of my hair care products, there also came disillusionment from some of the community. As you know, there are some Negroes who accuse me of straightening colored women's hair to make them look like white women's hair. Well, let me correct the erroneous impression that I claim to straighten hair. Okay? I deplore such an impression. I have always held myself out to be a hair culturist. What I'm trying to do is to help women have healthy hair and scalps. Okay? The key to success and beauty is a good appearance. You know, enough on that subject. In 1912, a friend of mine told me about the National Negro Business League Convention which was being held in Chicago, and he convinced me to go. I did, but while I was there, Booker T. Washington, the president of the organization, ignored every effort I made to meet him. So, I stood to my feet and I addressed Mr. Washington myself. I said, "Surely you are not going to shut the door in my face. I am in a business that I believe is a credit to the womanhood of our race. I'm a woman who started in business just 7 years ago with $1.50. And this year, up until the 18th day of this month, I have taken in $18,000 made in Indianapolis, okay? See, I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there, I was promoted to the wash tub. And then from there, I was promoted to the cook kitchen. Then I promoted myself onto the business of making hair care preparations and products. I'm not ashamed of my past. I am not ashamed of my humble beginnings. Don't think that because you have to go down in the wash tub that you are any less a lady. I have built my own factory on my own land. After that, you know, they clapped for a really long time. And Mr. Washington, he never ignored me again. In fact, he invited me to speak at the next National Negro Business League. And I did. In 1913, Alalia, she changed her name legally. She thinks it sounds elegant. Like a mama. Yeah. Opened a beauty parlor in Harlem. I joined her there 3 years later. In 1910, during a period when large numbers of colored people left southern states and moved to northern and midwestern cities in an attempt to escape Jim Crow and racism. You know, they are calling this the Great Migration. Yes. Now, speaking of Jim Crow, I donated large sums of money to causes, organizations, and people who've been trying to help our race. I gave thousands and thousands of dollars to Mary McLeod Bethune to start her school in Florida called Bethune-Cookman College. I gave a $5,000 donation to the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the largest donation they had ever received. I am giving money to artists, writers, and musicians to help them produce their work because they're struggling, especially here in New York. You know what? I think this is the beginning of a renaissance in Harlem. Yeah. Now, in 1916, I decided to buy this piece of property and build the home of my dreams here in Irvington on the Hudson River. I chose Vector W. Tandy, the architect, to design it, and then once it was built, I let my friend Enrique Caruso name it. He calls it Villa Lewaro. You know, that raised some eyebrows, believe you me. The villagers, well, that is what the residents here call themselves. noting the color of my skin, said, "There is no way a woman of her race could own such a place." They were wrong. Now, you know that I have been working hard to end discrimination against colored people. Over the last 2 years, there have been several hundred riots directed against colored people in northern cities, mostly the Midwest. For example, on July 1st, 1917, 2 white policemen were killed in East St. Louis, Illinois. An altercation caused when white marauders started to attack Negro homes. Well, that incident sparked a race riot on the 2nd of July, 1917. There were hundreds of Negro fatalities, hundreds of Negroes were injured, and thousands of Negroes fled the city when their homes were burned to the ground. They didn't start that trouble. This is our community afterwards. So, this behavior, we felt, was intolerable. So we responded, the NAACP, with the Negro Silent Protest Parade of 10,000 Negro men, women, and children marching down New York City's Fifth Avenue. More than 20,000 spectators lined the streets, silent as the marchers proceeded in silence. The march was organized by an ad hoc group led by James Weldon Johnson, diplomat, author, lawyer, educator, activist, one of the founders of the NAACP, and songwriter. You know, he wrote the Black National Anthem, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." Block after block, no sound broke the city's hush. We were completely silent. Men, women, and children carried placards that read, "Mothers, do lynchers go to heaven? Give me a chance to live. Treat us so that we may love our country. Mr. President, why not make America safe for democracy? And your hands are full of blood." The NAACP literature outlined the objectives and the goals of the march, and here are just 2 of them. We march because we deem it a crime to be silent in the face of such barbaric acts. We march because we are thoroughly opposed to Jim Crow cars' segregation, discrimination, disenfranchisement, lynching, and the host of evils that are forced on us. It is time that the Spirit of Christ should be manifested in the making and execution of laws. What an appropriate time to sing. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song, full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Thank you. Hardened by the public show of solidarity, I and my colleagues pressed on, hoping we could persuade national officials to make lynching a crime. National officials, Woodrow Wilson. These are postcards. The postcards were sold in stores. They were sold in businesses, and they were sold at fairs. Okay? And these are actual postcards, and that is the actual writing about this one here. This was the barbecue we had last night. My picture is to the left with a cross over it. Your son, Joe. He put a cross on it so she would know. Okay. We composed a petition. Then we requested a meeting with President Woodrow Wilson. We'll go back to Wilson to discuss the issue. I, along with James Weldon Johnson and W.E.B. Du Bois, the petition signers included Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr., Realtor John E. Nail, and New York Age publisher Fred Moore. Here is a portion of the petition we submitted to President Wilson. Mobs have harried and murdered colored citizens time and time again with impunity, culminating in the latest atrocity at East St. Louis. We believe that this spirit of lawlessness is doing untold injury to our country. We ask, therefore, that lynching and mob violence be made a national crime, punishable by the laws of the United States. In 1917, we went to Washington, D.C. to persuade President Wilson and Congress to make lynching and mob violence a crime. Upon our arrival, President Wilson claimed to be too busy to see us, dispatching his secretary, Joseph Tumulty, instead. Apparently, the plight of Negro Americans was not a national concern. A year later, President Wilson finally issued a public statement about lynching. The New York Times reported on July 27, 1918, almost a year to the date of the Negro silent protest parade, that President Wilson denounced mob spirit and mob action as emulating German lawlessness. And he urged the country's governors and law officers and citizens to actively and watchfully bring an end to lynching. His mild words, with no specific proposals for controlling lynching, had no apparent effect on the ongoing violence against Negroes. That was just last year. This year, 1919, I have returned to the business of operating my company. Now, I'm exhausted, and my doctor wants me to slow down, and I told him I will. But this company is my responsibility, and I have a meeting and gathering with my sales agents, and I won't postpone it. So, ladies, here we are. I hope you've enjoyed the convention and all of its festivities. I have truly enjoyed you, your conversation, and your commitment. And I want to thank you for joining us here. But before we leave, I want to thank you for being part of the Walker Company family
And I want to say to every Negro woman present, don't sit and wait for opportunity to come to you. Get up and make it. Well, good night, ladies. Lord willing, I will see you next year. Thank you for coming. CJ Walker, thank you.